In this episode, and for the next few episodes of Beyond at Home, we're going to explore the problem of Jesus. Because let's be honest, you have questions when it comes to Jesus. I have questions when it comes to Jesus. All of us have questions and problems when it comes to Jesus. And so for the next few episodes, we're going to address and tackle head on some of those problems. And today, we're going to start with the problem of the historical Jesus. Now, if you haven't already, why not like and subscribe to our channel so you can stay up to date on everything that we're releasing. But the reason that we're doing this series is because Jesus is the most interesting person in history. I mean, think about it. There is no one more written about, no one more talked about, no one with so many diverse opinions on someone than Jesus. But this series isn't just to talk about Jesus. This series is also for you. This series is to help you navigate your marriage. This series is to help you navigate your finances, navigate parenting, navigate forgiveness, navigate love, navigate all sorts of those things, because how you respond to Jesus influences all of those areas of your life and of my life. But before we get to you, we have to get to Jesus. More specifically, the scandal of Jesus. Now, let's be honest, that word scandal is a word that you and I probably wouldn't really associate with Jesus. See, for most of us, and maybe you're one of these people, you're watching this video, and to you, Jesus is like a spiritual teacher. He's a guru. He's someone with wisdom that we can learn from. But in the first century, no one thought of Jesus as their homeboy. In fact, there was only two responses to Jesus. You either loved Jesus and gave your life to follow him, or you hated and despised Jesus. It's really only in the 21st century that we've created this third option, that Jesus is my homeboy option. In fact, in a letter that a guy called Paul wrote to a church that he started in the city of Corinth, he said, "We preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block." And that word stumbling block is actually the word scandalon. We preach a scandal. In the biography Matthew writes on Jesus' life, he records a time where Jesus is teaching to a crowd. And the crowd's response to what Jesus is teaching is that they took offense to him. And that word offense is scandalon. In other words, the crowd thought that what Jesus was teaching should be front page news. It was so scandalous, so out there that it would make news and headlines everywhere. You see, the reality is Jesus doesn't allow us to pick a middle ground. When it comes to himself, Jesus says you've got to pick a side. You've either got to be all in or you've got to be all out. Now, before you get too uncomfortable, I want to talk about what we're going to talk about today. The problem of the historical Jesus. Now, this is a field of study that's really only kind of become popular in the last 200 years, but it's a field of study that seeks to look at the Jesus of history and the message that Jesus had. Really, this field of study seeks to kind of ask the question, did Jesus exist? Did a bunch of people just get together in a room and make a story up to try and give their latest iteration of God? Or was there a historical person named Jesus, and did he have a specific message that he wanted the world to hear? Here's what you need to know before we go any further. There is virtually no scholar in the world who denies the existence of Jesus. Now, before you kind of roll your eyes and be like, sure, Chris, they're all Christians. No. Historians who study this field, the majority of them aren't Christians. They're just people who like this period of history. And I also don't mean at this point some blog you read on Reddit, okay? I don't mean some podcast you listened to one time with someone who read an article that their uncle sent them. I mean historians that do this for a living. Virtually no one denies that Jesus existed. And we're going to look at some evidence for that. But I want to look at a place where maybe you wouldn't expect someone like me to start. Evidence outside of the Bible. Now, outside of the Bible, we have 10 authors or writers or historians from history that mention or reference Jesus. People from the Jewish historian Josephus to the Roman historian Tacitus to Pliny the Younger to Sotinus. A whole bunch of people talk about Jesus. Let me just give you one example from Tacitus. And it says, Nero fastened the guilt on a class hated for their abominations called Christians by the populace. So Nero there is Emperor Nero, the Roman emperor. Christus, for who the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of the procurator Pontius Pilate. Now, Tacitus is the only person outside of the Bible to refer to Pontius Pilate by name. You see, even if we didn't have the New Testament documents, There's a whole lot that we could construct about Jesus and know just from these people who wrote about Jesus outside of the Bible. Here's some things that we could know about Jesus. We could know that he was a Jewish teacher. We could know that people believed that he performed miracles and exorcisms. And if you're not sure about that one, you're going to want to tune in for episode 3 of this series. We would know that he was crucified under Pontius Pilate, and we would know that people believed that he died and then he rose again and they saw him face to face. So there's a whole bunch we can know about Jesus from the evidence outside the Bible, and we can paint a really good historical portrait of him. But what about from evidence within the Bible? That's where we're going to go now. Now, for me, this is where things get really interesting, because the 4 biographies that we have on Jesus' life, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, when they are measured up against the historical critical method, historians actually conclude that these are incredibly reliable documents historically for understanding Jesus. And let me give you a few of the reasons why historians think that. The first one is because of their use of names and places. If you look at the Gospels that we have, over and over again, they're constantly using names and places of people. They talk about people in political positions. They talk about regions that they went to. They talk about people that they encountered. Now, why would somebody do this? Well, the reason that they would do it is because they wanted to root their story in history. In fact, there's a moment where Jesus is carrying his cross up, and Mark almost pauses the story. And he says, hey, someone called Simon from Cyrene stops to help him. In fact, Simon is the father of Alexander and Rufus. And the reason Mark does this is because what he's saying is, hey, fact check me. If you don't believe me, I want you to go and have a conversation with these people. I want you to go to Cyrene. I want you to find the father of Alexander and Rufus, and I want you to talk this through. In fact, there are 30 people that we know from history because they're mentioned by name in the biographies we have of Jesus' life. The second thing is embarrassing evidence. Now think about this. If you and I were to get in a room and we were to create a world religion, how would we paint the leader of our religion? Probably, I imagine, in a Braveheart style way, charging into battle, fearless, knew exactly what was going to happen. When we read the biographies of Jesus' life, we find that Jesus was crying in a garden before his crucifixion, asking if there was any other way for it to happen. We also see that the writers of these biographies don't paint themselves in as heroes. They paint themselves in as people who doubted, as people who were unsure, as people who were confused. And historians conclude that because of this is actually good reason to trust the biographies we have of Jesus' life. Because if you were going to make this up, you wouldn't make it up in the way in which they've done it. The third reason historians believe in the reliability of these documents is because of the role that women played in them. Now, even in the 21st century, we still have a long way to go when it comes to equality for women within our society. But imagine in the first century. In the first century, women were not allowed to be eyewitnesses or give testimony in court because their testimony was considered unreliable. Want to know who the first 2 witnesses to the resurrection of Jesus were? Women. Now, if you were trying to convince someone that your story is legit, why would you use 2 people that couldn't be used in a court of law? It just tears your story to shreds. No one's going to believe it. If you were making this stuff up, you'd have men at the tomb, not women. And the final reason that historians believe in the reliability of the documents isn't necessarily because of something inside the Bible or outside of the Bible, but it's because of the persecution of the early church. Jesus had 12 followers, 12 disciples. Only one of them died a peaceful death. The other 11 were murdered. They were murdered and executed because of their belief that Jesus was God. Now here's a question. Would you die for something that you knew was a lie? And because of this, historians are inclined to trust the historicity and the reliability of the documents, because nobody would die for something that they made up. There was absolutely no gain for them. So the reality is, there is no problem when it comes to the historical Jesus. So where does that leave you? And where does that leave me as we wrestle with the problem of Jesus? I think we're left with a question that we all need to answer. And the question is, will you engage with the problem of Jesus? And there's a question underneath this question, which is the reason why it's so important to engage. And the question is, why is there nobody like Jesus? I mean, think about it. Why is a Jewish carpenter from the Middle East who had 12 followers the most influential person in history? Is he just a carpenter? Is he a prophet? Is he a religious guru? Or is he something more? So will you engage? Will you keep engaging over these videos over the next 4 weeks? And will you discover for yourself and wrestle for yourself the problems that you have with Jesus to the ground? It just might be the best decision you ever make. Hey, thanks so much for stopping by our channel. We'd love to connect with you, and there's a few ways you can do that down below. But I want to let you know of one way that you can do that. We can't answer all of your questions throughout this series. But in our Beyond the Message podcast, we want to answer some of your questions that maybe we don't get to over these episodes. So down below, you'll find the link to the Problem of Jesus website where you can ask us your questions and we'll get to them in a bonus podcast. We'll see you next time.